If you would, please join with me in opening God's Word to the book of Ezekiel. And Stan, this might, with the whole system, just a hair louder would be wonderful. Now, here's what we're going to do. This is going to be part 4. Yeah, there you go. I like to be surrounded with sound. Ezekiel chapter 14. Now, I knew that the Irwins were coming in. We were expecting another couple, and also Brian Stallings. He said he was going to be back here for sure, and he just got in on one part of this. And our normal study for Wednesday nights, we've been going through Revelation. But I thought, well, we've got all of these graphics and so forth. We just have a brief bit of review, get everybody up to speed, and then finish this out on a study that we have entitled 144,000 Brides for 144,000 Brothers. And this came as a question, and if we, as we contend, the 144,000 in the book of Revelation are to be fathers to start the kingdom, then where are they going to get their brides? Because they are caught up in a way to heaven, and they are preserved there as such until they come back. And so this study was designed to show how they get their wives. Now, we took the long road, the high road, though. It was a good one. But it was the long road to do this. So, first of all, we started off with a title, and this title pertains to God's promise to bless Israel numerically. And we showed that Sabaoth, is how it's pronounced, armies, hosts, and multitudes, the way it's translated in the scriptures, and all of these various things it relates to. But it especially relates to throngs, crowds, large numbers, something innumerable, and so forth. And this is the title upon which all of God's promises for numerical increase for Israel are based. Okay? Then we moved from that point to the Abrahamic covenant. And God promises for the nation of Israel, Abraham's seed, to be a great nation. Now, the interesting thing about that particular Hebrew word is that it means qualitatively great, quantitatively great. One superior in character, the other larger in number. Now, on the one side, because God has given Israel the law, His words, the covenants, His promises, and so forth, He wants them to reproduce His own character in the earth so that all the other nations can look to them and say, man, this is a fantastic nation because of what God has done and given. But then on the other hand, they are also promised to be the largest nation on the earth. And eventually in the kingdom, that's going to happen. We'll have a slide here in a little bit that'll let us know about the cap. We believe it'll be the cap number of Israel on earth. It might be more than that or less. We're not exactly sure. But then you come to the 3 innumerable things that God associates with Israel's population. He said, Abraham, your seed is going to be as the dust of the earth. They're His earthly people. As the stars of heaven, they are heavenly lights on this earth. As the sand of the seashore. The Gentiles represent large bodies of water, the sea, but the sand is above and encompasses the large body of water as such. So, all of these various things, Israel, with the last point, Israel is to be above the Gentiles. And so all of these things are important and are pertinent to what we're talking about. Israel being multiplied. Now, from here, we then looked at the fact that the Lord of Sabaoth is also translated the Lord of hosts. It's the very same word. And this is how he is introduced as the one sitting on the mercy seat between the cherubim. Now, the cherubim are like the watchers down there in the recount ballots in Florida. people are recounting and so forth, and you've got your Republican watcher and you've got your Democrat watcher, and so you can't cry foul. Now they're talking about dimpled ballots. Now, how in the world those can't be thrown out? I don't know what the machine kicked them out, but they're going to qualify them now. But the Republicans are saying, cry foul with this. It's not fair. The Democrats are saying, well, that's what these two angels are. And here is the Lord of Sabaoth, or the Lord of hosts, making these promises. And they're going to make sure that God keeps his word to Israel, or he forfeits the angelic conflict. So inside of this ark, and by the way, the ark is called not just the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of the Testimony. What testimony? The testimony that God has promised Israel multiplication of her seed, and that her seed will be eternally preserved. Those things are inside of this ark, as God, the Lord of hosts, sits on the top of it. Okay, then we considered just briefly that Pharaoh's sin was actually one of trying to decrease Israel's population. Yes, he wouldn't let them go to the land. He wanted to keep them as slaves, but he also didn't want them to get numerically greater than the Egyptians, which they went down there and they were fruitful and multiplied. And so he tried to kill the male babies and decrease the number. And of course, God ended up decreasing the number of the population of Israel. The 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn, and the killing of the hosts of Pharaoh, all of the armies in the Red Sea. And this becomes a truism for history. Anytime you have a person or a nation or a group of nations that come against the Jews to try to decrease their number, God eventually judges those people who do so. And we can list biblically and in secular history. For example, Adolf Hitler are those that are examples of people who tried to annihilate or exterminate the Jews, and they got their comeuppance eventually. But the point is throughout history, sometimes the Jewish population falls all the way down to where it seems like they're going to be exterminated. And then sometimes it grows. We call this the doctrine of Israel's population teeter-totter. Now, we looked into Deuteronomy 28 and Deuteronomy 30, and we found a principle that until you get to the point of the kingdom and onward, Israel is going to have a smaller population and a greater population, and a smaller population and a greater. Up and down it goes. They'll be taken off the land, brought back into the land. And it's all contingent upon their obedience. If they disobey, of course, God reduces their number. And that should pose a threat to them because everything is tied up in this future kingdom. Will they have a generation to enter the kingdom and perpetuate the Jews? And in fact, we found that God, I don't know if you call this having a sense of humor or what, but one of the judgments, the punishments when they disobey, was that eventually they would have to eat their own flesh, eat their own children, so that there would be no future for them. They'd gobble up their kids because there wasn't enough to eat. But on the other hand, when they obeyed, God began the process of slowly multiplying them. Okay, so you have Israel's options with regard to this population. If you hearken to my word, and this is the contingency of the Old Testament, if you hearken, blessed shall be the fruit of thy body. But if not, cursed shall be the fruit of your body. And it simply means that not just with the cattle and not just with the crop, but with children. They're going to multiply and have a lot of kids. On the other hand, because of their disobedience, God is going to reduce their ranks. All right. So therefore you come to God's own covenant promise. The reason this is so important for us to study is that this is something God had said He will do. You have conditional covenants, if you will, I will. And you have unconditional covenants. I will, says God. Okay? These are unconditional covenants. God's going to do it. It's conditioned upon himself. So I will multiply thee exceedingly. I will make thee exceeding fruitful. And so he gave these, as we saw, to actually all the generation of Jews. But for our study, we considered the first four, considered the fathers of the nation of Israel, and then eventually the kingdom generation. The generation that would be a seed that would serve him, that would start the eternal kingdom. And that's coming up. So, we also saw, and this is a tremendous covenant guarantee. Every time Israel looks at the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, the way things are, God made a decree that these things would never pass away. They'll be refurbished, but you're going to have a new heaven and a new earth. It's still going to be there, and it's going to be there forever, because God has given them the earth for a possession, and especially the land to these saints. So there's the covenant guarantee, and we call this the covenant of celestial perpetuation. And God quotes this time and again, pointing Israel's eyes to the fact that these will not pass away, and if these won't, your seed will not either. Okay. Now, this brought us then, we're beginning to make the transition toward the kingdom. At the end, we have a judgment. Right before the kingdom starts, Jesus Christ returns. He sits on a throne and he begins the process of judgment. One of the reasons for this judgment is to eliminate the seed of the wicked. Remember, he's got to get rid of their population. Why? Because they're going to outnumber Israel. So what does he do? He simply throws them into the lake of fire, burns their flesh, kills them off, birds eat them. Well, all those judgments there in Revelation. But the ones that are left physically alive, that have the potential of going into the kingdom, if they have the mark of the beast, then they are rejected. They're called goats. They're on his left hand, and they go to hell. This is the lake of fire that was prepared for the devil and his angels. The goats have joined him in his rebellion. They are cast there. But it's the sheep nations that we want to look at, because with these you begin to have your answer of where the 144,000 get their bride, their sheep. So they go into the kingdom. And they are part of the remnant, as we'll see here. And by the way, you'll forgive the castle. It looks a little like Camelot, I guess. I don't know, but it gives you the picture of heaven and so forth. When I showed you the example there of Spain, I'm sorry. Let's go back. Let's see if. All right, let's go back one. I don't mean to be unprofessional, but there are times when you get ahead of yourself. All nations, therefore, are going to be split into two. Now, here's an example. Spain. There are going to be some Spaniards, the majority, that will take the mark of the beast, of course. Spain is one of the 10 core nations of Antichrist. It will be. But there will be other Spaniards who will run and hide in the wilderness and so forth and not take the mark of the beast. And there are Jews in Spain. That was part of the Inquisition years back. There are Jews in Spain, brought great blessings to that particular nation. There are still Jews there. And so these groups are going to hide. The Gentiles who hide the Jews are sheep nations. Even though the rest of the Spaniards have taken the mark, they're the goats. But out of one nation comes two, and Christ divides them as sheep and goats. So all of the nations of the world will be gathered together, and the goats will be separated, and the sheep will be separated. Though they're of the same race, the determining factor is, have you taken the mark? Have you been friendly to the remnant of Israel? And remember, it's an interesting thing. Jesus said, these are my brothers and sisters. And you go through the chapter and it says, because you have done this to the least of my brethren, you have not fed them, you've not watered them, you've not cared for them, and so forth, you go into hell or you go into the kingdom. Okay. Now, Israel is the very same way. Israel is going to be one nation, but not all Jews go into the kingdom. As a matter of fact, as we've studied here many times before, it is a stroke of genius to keep Israel's population as the sand of the sea, and that's what Paul says. Though the nation of Israel is as the sand of the sea, a remnant's going to be saved. Well, how does that come about? Because Antichrist allows Israel to grow to a large number, but he disqualifies all of them. How? The mark. So they become goats. They're still Jews, they're still Israelites, part of the nation, part of his government, but they're still goats. But what is not known, and probably as far as I know, we're the only ones who do this. Now that doesn't make us weird, but I'll tell you what, it does make us right, because it's absolutely true. Israel is split into three. The first is all of the goats. But the second is the remnant split in two. Now, the remnant, or the sheep nations, have 144,000 males who are sealed in their forehead, certified as coming from a specific tribe, 12,000 each, and they are caught up to heaven. But now there is also, as we saw, a remnant on earth, and that's what we'll be looking into here just very quickly. Before we do, we also studied the prayer of Moses. He wants Israel to be multiplied 1,000 times more than they are. Now, that prayer was uttered, that desire expressed, when Israel was 2 million strong. If that's true, and God answers that prayer, which is what I believe he will do, 2 million times 1,000 gives us 2 billion, I do believe. We ran it by the calculator several times. Check it out, but I believe that's correct, which may point to a cap in eternity future, that the population of Israel in the kingdom might go to 2 billion physically. Now, there'll be other Jews there. At the point of the start of the kingdom, you also have all the resurrected Old Testament saints and tribulation martyrs. But we're not talking about them right now, and the reason being, though they'll be in the kingdom, if you have a resurrected, glorified body, what can't you do? You're not allowed to procreate. They are disqualified for being fathers in Israel. You have to have people that are physically alive, but not in a resurrection body. So, we just took it, and you do the math. You knew I was going to say that. One man had 12 sons with 12 tribes. 12 tribes times 1,000 equals 12,000. 12 tribes times 12,000 equals 144,000. That's where we get the number. You go to the book of Deuteronomy, first chapter, and the number appears in the book of Revelation, the 7th chapter. All right, now here's how it works. These people, and we've already studied this, they're called the first fruits of the remnant. Now, that means that God has taken them first, and they're certified, their pedigrees, they are who God says they are, and he, in the first half of the tribulation period, he seals them, but right in the midst, they are removed from the earth. We find them not on earth, but in Mount Zion, standing next to the Lamb in heaven. They are part of what is called the bride of Christ. Now, the bride of Christ has some members that are not in bodies. They're clothed in white robes. They died, they went to heaven, and that's how they are until they come back and get their resurrection bodies. There'll be some members of the bride of Christ that will have physical bodies. Enoch is one of them, but it's glorified. Moses and Elijah, eventually theirs will be glorified. The rest will have white robes waiting a glorified body, but there's 144,000 people who come back that have physical bodies, but they are not resurrected and they are not glorified, and they are able to reproduce. So God preserves them through the last 3.5 years and returns them at the start of the kingdom. Okay, now we then focused in on the remaining seed of the remnant. Now, what God does here is that these people are saved. And remember who is preaching during the first 3.5 years. Moses and Elijah, the two witnesses, come back. The 144,000 are sealed during this time. They preach as well. You have the Great Commission beginning to be fulfilled at this time. So you have, it says in chapter 6 of Revelation, you have a multitude that no man can number. Out of the whole earth, they are being saved. But especially Jews are being saved. One of the reasons that we know that, and we'll see in just a little bit, is that they are gathered from the four corners of the earth. That's one place. The next place is they are preserved in northern Israel because of Russia coming down and bivouacking there. They have food and water and a place to escape to because of that, the Battle of Gog and Magog. And then the most famous of all, in the midst of the week, there is a group of Jews who see the abomination of desolation and they flee south to the wilderness, south to Petra. And Revelation says it's a place prepared of God where God is going to feed them for 3.5 years. So they too are removed from the scene. They too are now in hiding and preserved. But they will be returned. Now, the whole thing is, therefore, they all come together at the point of the earthly kingdom. And this is how it goes. You'll see the dot in the middle there and the two arrows up and down. Up means that the 144,000 are removed. 3.5 years in heaven, they come back with Christ at the point when the earthly kingdom is born. Then, at the same time when they're taken up, the other group flees to the wilderness or goes to hiding. They're preserved for 3.5 years, and they come back at the point of the earthly kingdom. Now, answer to the question of this study. Where do the 144,000 males, and they're all males, get their brides? Because an unknown number of the remnant, both males and females, return to the land from the earth. So here we are in Ezekiel chapter 14, and the remainder of our time is going to be reading and commenting on several portions of Scripture. All right, chapter 14 and verse number 21. Thus saith the Lord God, how much more when I send my 4 sore judgments upon Jerusalem? And he names them there. Yet, behold, therein shall be left a remnant that shall be brought forth. Note, both sons and daughters. Verse 23, and they shall comfort you when you see their ways and their doings. How will Israelis be comforted when they see the remnant come back? Because they will begin reproducing, having children, and their seed is not going to be annihilated. Okay, let's move on here. Isaiah chapter 10. Now there'll be several portions, but if you just follow along, get the gist, see what it says, you will understand that this is exactly how it happens. Isaiah chapter 10, verse 20. It shall come to pass in that day that the remnant of Israel, such as are escaped of the house of Judah, shall no more again stay upon him that smote them, they'll stay upon the Lord, the Holy One. The remnant shall return, even the remnant of Jacob. For though thy people Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant shall return. Now, we find out with Ezekiel that the remnant contains both sons and daughters. So it's a lot of males, a lot of females. We know that there will be at least 144,000 females for the guys returning. Chapter 11. Verse 11. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of the people. And it's from all over. He'll set up an ensign for the nations and shall assemble the outcast of Israel. Gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Verse number 16. And there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people, which is left from, and it lists them. Now, if you'll hold your place here and just hold it, because we'll be coming right back there, come to Matthew chapter 24. Now, this is how it happens as well. It says, verse number 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun is darkened and so forth. Verse 30, then shall appear the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. He shall send his angels, verse 31, with a great sound of the trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. Now come on down to verse number 40. Then shall two be in the field, one shall be taken, the other left. You see, the one that's taken, the others that's left is left in judgment. The one that's taken is taken to bypass the judgment. Two women grinding at the mill, the one taken, the other left. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come. So, from the four corners of the earth, God begins the process of preserving the remnant and bringing them back to the land. All right, Isaiah chapter 37. Isaiah 37, 31. And the remnant that is escaped of the house of Judah shall again take root downward and bear fruit upward. Now, what's that mean? It means they're going to go to the land and they're going to build their houses and they're going to settle there. This is my land. And bearing fruit upward means that they're going to begin increasing the population. They're going to have kids. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant of they that are escaped of Mount Zion. The seal of the Lord shall do this. You see, I will multiply thee. I will make you exceeding fruitful. Let's go to Jeremiah, chapter 23. Jeremiah 23 and verse 3. Here's what God does. I'll gather the remnant of my flock out of all countries where I've driven them. I will bring them again to their folds, and they shall be fruitful and increase. See? Right at that point of the kingdom. Gather them, and they're going to start up the kingdom. I'll set shepherds over them and feed them. They'll not be lacking, says the Lord. Let's come from this point. Let's see, what chapter are we in? 23. Verse 7. The Lord lives, which brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Remember, the Lord of hosts brought them up. The throngs, there were 2 million. The promise, may God make you 1,000 times greater. But the Lord liveth, which brought up and which led the seed of the house of Israel out of the north country, and from all countries whither I had driven them, they'll dwell in their own land. Jeremiah chapter 31. And verse number 27. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man. So it's at this point. I mean, these things are obvious what's happening. He gathers them together as a flock. You've got the male and the female, and they begin to increase. And it all happens at the point of the earthly kingdom onward. The earthly kingdom starts. It is born. A nation is born at once. A kingdom is born in a day. And from that point, then the population of Israel begins to be multiplied. Let's go here to Joel, chapter 2. And he's going to bring them into the land. Verse number 27. Ye shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and none else. My people shall never be ashamed. In other words, God is going to fulfill this promise. All the promises, but especially this one. Now, here's how we know as well that the earthly remnant is not just male. It says, and it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. You see, those that take this and make it pertain to today in the dispensation of grace are forgetting that God the Holy Spirit is poured out upon them to empower them. Now, empower them to live for the Lord, to keep the law, but you know what else? Empower them to have sex. That's the thing, to reproduce children. I'm going to pour out my spirit on your sons and your daughters. All your handmaids in those days, I'm going to pour out of my spirit. Why? Because when the kingdom starts, they're going to have to multiply Israel. And just like Rebecca had twins, it's possible that twins and triplets and quadruplets and so forth can happen, because that's now ladies, don't. It's a miracle. It's a wonder. But we'll let the men and the women in the kingdom have all those kids. Okay? It shall come to pass, verse 32, whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be delivered. In Mount Zion and Jerusalem shall be deliverance, and in the remnant whom the Lord shall call. So God calls the remnant home, 144,000 down. The rest from the four corners, northern Israel, southern Israel, they all come to the land. They're married to the land. The suzerainty vassal treaty that we studied before, the king and his people and his city are all married. But then there are other marriages taking place. We know of at least 144,000 that will, because God starts the process of multiplication. All right. Let's go back to Isaiah, and with the time remaining, finish up there. Chapter 49. Now, some of these portions are a little long, but if you would just follow through with me, we just have 4 passages in Isaiah, and then we'll be done. But all of these things show that as soon as the kingdom starts, immediately the process of increasing Israel's population begins. All right, verse 8. In an acceptable time I've heard thee, in the day of salvation I've helped thee. I will preserve thee and give thee as a covenant for the people, and cause you to inherit the desolate heritages. Now, the desolate heritages are those places where Israel once was, they weren't, and now they're back again, and now they begin to fill up. that you may say to the prisoners, and so forth. They shall feed in the ways, and their pastures shall be in all the high places. Not going to hunger, not going to thirst. The heat's not going to smite them, and so forth. Going to exalt the mountains. These shall come from afar. These from the north, from the west, from the land of Sinim. That's the east. That's southern China. And they're going to sing and break forth into singing. But Zion said, the Lord hath forsaken me, my God has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her sucking child, that she should not have compassion on the son of her womb? Behold, says God, verse 16, I've graven thee in the palms of thy hands. Verse 17, thy children shall make haste. Let's move on down here. 4, note what verse 19 says. For thy waste and thy desolate places and the land of destruction shall even now be too narrow by reason of the inhabitants. Now, that means that they outgrew their house. They outgrew their land. God had to provide just a little more for them. There wasn't anybody there, and all of a sudden they come back to the land, and now there's too many. And they that swallowed thee up shall be far away. The children which thou shalt have after you have lost the other children shall say again in thine ears, the place is too strait, it's too restricted for me. Give place that I might dwell. And thou shalt say in thine heart, who has begotten me these, seeing I have lost my children? You see, the children of Israel sand of the sea. Most of them took the mark. It's reduced to nothing. Then all of a sudden, man, where'd this brood come from? I have lost my children. I'm desolate and captive, removing to and fro. Behold, I was left alone. Where had these been? Okay, so let's, here's another, verse 22. I don't want to forget this. Behold, I will lift up my hand to the Gentiles. I'll set up my standard to the people. They shall bring thy sons in their arms, and thy daughters shall be carried upon the shoulders. Last part of verse 23, for they shall not be ashamed that wait for me. And it's waiting for the redemption of Israel, waiting for Israel to be delivered, and waiting for Israel to be restored. Chapter 54. Point of the kingdom starting again. Sing, O barren, thou that didst not bear. Break forth into singing and cry aloud, thou that didst not travail with child. For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife. Israel is married to Jehovah, and the Gentiles have more than the Jews. But now the kingdom comes. Enlarge the place of your tent. You know, some have had kids, and you know what you have to do. Build a room on. Move to a bigger house. And so that's what this is. Enlarge the place of your tent. Let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitation. Spare not, lengthen the cords, strengthen the stake. For thou shalt break forth on the right hand and on the left, and your seed shall inherit the Gentiles. You're going to be more in number. You'll have them for your servants. And make the desolate cities to be inhabited. All right? Let's see if we go to verse number 13. See what that says. In the kingdom, therefore, all your children that you're going to bear shall be taught of the Lord. Now, verse number 17. Now, usually, pastors take this verse. Till I realized what it was, pastors take this verse because you get to thinking, okay, you're impregnable. You know, God is going to, and nothing's ever going to happen to you. You just trust the Lord. Well, in one sense, of course, that's true. He has everything in control. But in the other sense, it's not what it's talking about. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. What's it talking about? It's talking about the fact that people are going to try to reduce the numbers of Israel. It's not going to work. Every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment, thou shalt condemn. In other words, in the kingdom, you're not going to have the mark of the beast. People will condemn them, and not in the kingdom, rather the tribulation. People will condemn them. They'll get their head chopped off. But still, God is going to preserve a remnant, and Israel is going to rise. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their righteousness is of me, saith the Lord. The 144,000 are called servants of God. To do what? To provide the service of multiplying Israel. All right? Come to chapter 61. Two more and we are about done. Now, the context of this, again, verse 1, the Spirit of God is upon me. And see, when the Spirit of God comes on the remnant in unglorified bodies, by the way, this is what happened in the upper room for the nation of Israel. This is when the kingdom church started. There were men and women, there was 120 of them, the Spirit of God came on, and Peter said, this is the remnant. This is what Joel was speaking of. And your sons and your daughters. But part of that, the Holy Spirit's going to come on to increase them reproductively. So you come on down here to verse number 4. This is the point of the kingdom, at the acceptable year of the Lord, verse 2. They shall build the old wastes. They shall raise up the former desolations. They shall repair the waste cities, the desolation of many generations. Come to verse 7. For your shame ye shall have double, and for confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess the double, everlasting joy to them. For I, the Lord, love judgment. He's made an everlasting covenant with them. Now, their seed shall be known among the Gentiles, their offspring among the people. All that see them shall acknowledge them and say, they are the seed which the Lord has blessed. So you come to this point and you see these marriages, and all of a sudden multitude of kids there, and all the other Gentile nations that are saved, they're sheep, they're in there, are going to look, isn't God good? He has fulfilled his promise and his word to the nation of Israel. This is the seed. This is the generation. This is the time that God blesses. And from there on, Israel's ranks will never be decimated again. So, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord, and so forth. Because as the bridegroom decketh himself with ornaments, as a bride adorneth herself with jewels, for as the earth brings forth her bud, and as the garden causes the things that are sown in it to spring forth, so the Lord thy God will cause righteousness and praise to spring forth before all the nations. That has to do with these kids. All right, one last portion. Thank you for your patience. Let's go to chapter 65. And verse number 18. But be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. God, at this point, is going to create a whole entirely new population for Israel. I create Jerusalem rejoicing and her people a joy. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people. The voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. 2 reasons. Number 1, all the dead, the martyrs, and all the Old Testament saints will be resurrected and rejoined in fellowship. All those living will begin producing other Jews. There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that has not filled his days. The child shall die 100 years. There will be children in the kingdom, as we've said, and they shall build houses and inhabit them, eat of the fruit of the land. And verse number 23 again. They shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. All right. So we have read and gone through all of this just simply to say, where do the 144,000 Jewish males get their brides? When they come back from heaven, there is an unknown number of females that will return to the land. They have been hiding somewhere on the earth for 3.5 years. They will be gathered at that point and return to the land. after the judgment of the sheep and the goats, the sheep will go in there, and the 144,000 will take their pick of 144,000 females. And from that time, they will begin reproducing offspring, and Israel will be multiplied.